At the trial of Michael Steele and Jack Williams, D.C. Brown and D.C. Winston denied they discussed the case with Darren Nicholls off tape. Nicholls himself denied police questioned him about the case off tape. Mr. Craddock, his solicitor, was called to give evidence to assist the prosecution rebut allegations of improper conduct by the interviewing officers. He did not criticise the police conduct. It was not until December 2004, when the CCRC referred the case to the Court of Appeal, that it was discovered that Craddock himself had been a police officer with the Metropolitan Police Service prior to having represented Nicholls. He had practical experience of the Witness Protection Scheme during his time there. Craddock was not present during all the meetings between police and Nicholls. During his trial testimony, Nicholls denied he had ever told the police that he'd met Steele at Marks Tay at 6 p.m. on the 6th of December 1995. This is a highly significant point because during Steele's interview on the 17th of May 1996 at 11:28 a.m. on page 12, D.C. Shakespeare, subsequently convicted and imprisoned for dishonesty, confirmed that Nicholls had told the police that Nicholls was already at Marks Tay when Mr. Steele arrived there at 6 p.m. On the same page, Shakespeare confirmed that he did not have transcripts of the Nicholls interview in which he gave that information. Did D.C. Shakespeare commit perjury at the trial when he told the jury he had interviewed transcripts of Nicholls' interviews during the time he was interviewing Steele? One assumes he wanted to portray a false view of the strength of the investigation to the jury. Shakespeare told the court that his information to justify the assertion that Steele was at Marks Tay at 6 p.m. came from two sources: the interview transcripts for Nicholls' interviews and a briefing from fellow officers. He was adamant that he had not invented the 6 p.m. time for Marks Tay. For police to have put the allegation to Steele that at 6 p.m. he was at Marks Tay, they had to have evidence to support that contention. Shakespeare stated at trial that he had not invented it. If it had not been invented by the police, the only source it could have possibly come from was Darren Nicholls. The fact that this information had to have come from Nicholls proves that Essex police were discussing the case with him outside of the confines of a PACE complaint formal tape recorded interview. This was something that Brown, Winston and Nicholls constantly denied. The police were bound to deny it occurred because it was flagrantly in breach of the Police and Criminals Evidence Act 1984. Entries in Nicholls' custody record for lengthy welfare visits, where it claimed the case was not discussed, can now be understood in a much better context. These were occasions where the police and Nicholls were preparing ground for what would be formally recorded at his next interview or statement-taking session. In other words, these were the sessions in which Nicholls' fabricated evidence was being prepared. The police continued to maintain that all conversations with Nicholls about the case were tape recorded. The police failed to supply the defence with copies of all tapes of Nicholls' interviews. The way Steele was interviewed is in keeping with the notes of D.C. Shakespeare, rather than the content of Nicholls' interview 4. There are too many inconsistencies for this not to have been so. Up until the start of Steele's 11:28 interview on the 17th of May, Nicholls had not provided a time for the Marks Tay meeting during his tape-recorded interviews. In fact, he had not even been asked what time the meeting had taken place during these interviews. This now appears significant. By the time his statement is completed, on the 22nd of May 1996, the timing of the meeting at Marks Tay is recorded as being 5 p.m. and not at 6 p.m, which Shakespeare put to Mr. Steele at interview on 17th of May when he confirmed that this information came from Darren Nicholls. Before trial, the solicitor for Steele, Chris Bowen, had discovered cogent evidence that at 17:01 Mr. Steele was at a fuel station at Ardley, not at Marks Tay, with Darren Nicholls. A copy of a petrol receipt was provided. Oddly, Williams was questioned on the basis that he was at Marks Tay at 5:50. It is clear from the officer's handwritten notes that in respect for the 5:50 and 6 p.m. times for Marks Tay put to Williams and Steele respectively, that the original time for that was shown as 18:30. That time would have made it impossible for later events described by Nicholls, the murders, to have occurred if the meeting had been at 6:30 at Marks Tay. During Operation Obtain, DC Brian White and DC Wyatt, key members of the incident office, were interviewed and gave statements. DC Wyatt's statement, dated the 7th of April 2004, provided background information about the investigation. Initially, he was responsible for setting up an intelligence unit within the home's incident room, with specific responsibility for gathering and developing intelligence with respect for telephone usage, including cell site analysis. Following the meeting between Detective Superintendent Barrington and Nicholls during the evening of the 14th of May 1996, an unlawful interview, he confirmed that Nicholls was interviewed by DC Brown and DC Winston. Wyatt explained, "I have a clear recollection of waiting for the senior management team for the investigation, whilst the interview with Darren Nicholls took place. I can recall the subsequent briefing provided to the management team by the interviewing officers, Detective Constable Michael Brown and Detective Constable Christopher Winstone. I can recall the initial account of events that had been put forward by Darren Nicholls in respect of the 3 murders, and I can remember the elation of the investigation management team. In my view, the first account provided by Darren Nicholls was fully supported by the intelligence available at the time." DC Brian White gave a statement on the 26th of April 2004. He was initially a receiver and action allocator in the home's incident room. On Nicholls' cooperation with the police, he explained, "It is fair to say that Darren Nicholls' account of the night in question gave me great satisfaction, as I knew the information was corroborated by cell site analysis of the mobile telephones used by himself, Steele, and Wombs at the time of the murders. The cell site data has since been proved not reliable. I was excited by the prospect that I was to learn from Nicholls' account exactly how the parties made their way to the scene of the murders and how the offenders had been able to effect the murders. This account given by Darren Nicholls was detailed and comprehensive and was corroborated by cell site analysis of the mobile telephones used by himself, Michael Steele and Jack Wombs at the time of the murders. Did these officers deliberately mislead the Operation Obtain investigators back in 2004, and hence the CCRC and Court of Appeal itself? Their assertions about Nicholls' evidence being consistent with cell site analysis and police intelligence is not correct. If Nicholls' first account had been consistent with police intelligence, logic detects that there would have been no need for any further versions. Moreover, that first account would be the one police would have put to the suspects at interview. Police did not question Wombs and Steele about being at Marks Tay at 5 p.m. They put it to them that they were there, respectively, at 6 p.m. and 5:50. That then had to be the first version Nicholls gave, which is why it has been recorded by D.C. Shakespeare in his notes, and why Steele was questioned about meeting at Marks Tay at 6 p.m. Brian White and Robin Wyatt say this was consistent with cell site analysis. Unfortunately for the police, this analysis shows that these 2 officers cannot be correct in their account of the way their investigation developed. There was a revisionist history, which was recounted to hide the truth and obstruct the truth. There was a real problem for the police in relation to Nicholls' first account of the 6 p.m. meeting at Marks Tay. At some point, the police realised what Nicholls had told them about meeting Steele at 6 p.m. at Marks Tay was a lie. The police did not need to work very hard to discover this, because they had had the information proving this as long ago as the 14th of December 1995. It was a cell site analysis from Mr. Steele's mobile phone. This analysis showed that at 16:03, his mobile phone was being serviced by the Shoreditch cell site in a completely different part of Essex to Marks Tay. It would have been impossible for Steele to have been at Marks Tay at 6 p.m. and then to pick up the Shoreditch beacon at 6:03. The account given by Nicholls in interview 4 is inconsistent with information contained in questions put to both Steele and Wombs at interview. At the Barrington meeting, an unlawful interview which was not tape recorded, and no contemporaneous record taken, Nicholls decided to answer police questions in his forthcoming interviews and to dispense with his solicitor. Prior to this, he had made no comment interviews and had a solicitor present. The reason it is submitted that the police did not ask Nicholls in interview 4 what time the meeting occurred at Marks Tay was because by the time the interviews were recorded, they knew that 6 p.m. did not match the cell site analysis. If they had placed 5 p.m. as the time for Marks Tay in the interview, it would have drawn attention to the fact that the time in interview 4 is completely at odds with that put to the suspects. Well after the police put the 6 p.m. meeting to Stillard's interview, the police did not ask Nicholls about the time for that meeting. By the time of their S177A statement was taken, he knew that he had to say the meeting was at 5 p.m. to fit the timeline. At trial, the Crown did not seek to place the interview transcripts of either defendant before the jury. Summaries were prepared instead. In the light of the above exposition, it may be that the Crown was doing all they could to avoid the potential damaging Mark's Tame material going before the jury. One further damning piece of cell-site evidence that completely undermines the Crown and Nicholls' account of the Mark's Tame meeting time is the call at 12 minutes past 5 from Worms to Steele, whilst he was at the Willowmere Caravan Park in Sudbury, Suffolk, some 14.5 miles and at least 29 minutes away. Worms could not have been at the Mark's Tame meeting as stated by the police and Darren Nicholls and given in evidence. Simply put, Darren Nicholls lied. The police then had to adapt the time to suit the facts.